All right, another day, another video. Man, why is it so hard to figure out how to start these things? Welcome back to the Writing Lab. Sometimes the hardest part of an essay is just getting started. Your introduction paragraph is vital because it's your first impression on your reader. Have you ever had that experience where you've got a plethora of awesome ideas for an essay, but your introduction paragraph ends up sounding like you're just awkwardly clearing your throat before you start talking? If so, we need some strategies for kicking out an effective introduction paragraph. Let's get to it. First off, let's think about the why here. Why do we even have an introduction paragraph? Why can't we just jump straight into our first body paragraph, get right to the meat of the thing? Imagine reading an essay that starts like that, just jumps right into the body paragraphs. What would the problem be? The way I see it, you would have three problems. First, you wouldn't know what the focus or main point of the essay is. It might take you until the end of the essay just to figure out what the author is trying to prove, and that's a big problem. Second, you might not have the necessary context or background information to understand what the author is talking about. And finally, you would very likely have no interest in reading the essay, and a bored reader is not an attentive reader. This means that a good introduction serves three purposes. It engages your reader's interest, it gives your reader some background and context to understand your topic, and it tells your reader exactly what you're trying to prove before you start trying to prove it. As long as your introduction paragraph accomplishes those three purposes, you could write it a million different ways and it'd still be great. But if you're struggling to figure out how to accomplish the three purposes of an introduction paragraph, it helps to think of an intro as having three parts: an attention grabber or a hook, contextual background information, and a solid thesis statement. These three parts in exactly that order almost always work. And that means I should be able to look at your introduction paragraph and find your thesis statement without even reading a word. Why? Because it should be at the end of your introduction. Think of these three parts as sections of a building. Even though your reader is going to read your paragraph from the top down, you really need to build it from the foundation up. That means you have to start with a great thesis statement. In fact, before you start writing any paragraph for your essay, you should spend time crafting a killer thesis statement. We focused on thesis statements in several modules already, so I'm going to assume that at this stage you already have a great thesis. If not, go work on that and come back when you're ready. The next stage we need to think about is giving your reader some context. The word context means the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular event, situation, etc. I'm interested in filmmaking, so I'm going to use a filmmaking analogy here. In movies, we have something called an establishing shot. Basically, an establishing shot is a big, wide shot that shows the larger setting where a scene is taking place. For example, The Dark Knight, such an awesome movie, opens with a scene about a specific group of people robbing a specific bank. But before we see any of that, we get an establishing shot that shows how the action in the scene fits into the larger setting of Gotham City. This opening shot establishes some context for the scene. In the same way, your thesis statement should be a specific claim about a specific topic. But that specific topic is always going to be a small part of a much larger body of information or circumstances. Essentially, your paper is going to be a brief close-up of some specific details. In the introduction, just for a few sentences, you need to zoom out a little to show how your close-up fits into the big picture. Let's say the topic for your essay is the effect of cell phones and social media on interpersonal communications. And your thesis statement looks something like this. Because texting and Facebook updates often make up the majority of teenagers' social interactions, today's teenagers are less likely to develop face-to-face communication skills and tend to be less adept at noticing and responding appropriately to social cues than the previous generation's teenagers. This is a very specific focus for an essay, which is great. But this issue is just a small part of much larger issues about the rise of technology and social media, the complexities of interpersonal relationships and social interactions, the unique qualities of that stage of life called adolescence, and even the big broad flow of human history. If we look back at our blueprint for a good introduction, we have a great thesis statement. What we need now is some contextual background information before that thesis. In other words, we need to zoom out a little and see some of the larger picture. As you do this, think about your audience. What does your audience already know about this topic, and what might they need to know? And remember, your teacher is usually not the audience, even if she's the only one who will read your paper. There are several ways you could write this background info piece, but really you just need to decide how far out you want to zoom. We could zoom out just a little to see some of the details surrounding our focus. A recent study by the Pew Research Center found that almost 80% of American teenagers own cell phones. 95% of teenagers have Facebook accounts, and 2/3 of them communicate via text message every day. Considering these facts, you could argue that today's teenagers are more connected to the world around them than any previous generation has ever been. However, these connections are almost all digital. Teenagers' friends are the people they communicate with most on Facebook or Snapchat, rather than people they actually spend time with in the physical world. Teenagers are constantly in communication with each other, but since most of this communication is typed, teens don't gain experience with reading facial expressions or interpreting tones of voice. Because texting and Facebook updates often make up the majority of teenagers' social interactions, today's teenagers are less likely to develop face-to-face communication skills and tend to be less adept at noticing and responding appropriately to social cues than the previous generation's teenagers. Or we could zoom way out and look at the historical big picture. Over the last century, technology has advanced exponentially. Electricity has only been widely available for about 100 years. The personal computer became common in the 80s. The World Wide Web became available to the public in 1991. Text messaging became common in the late 1990s. Facebook launched in 2004. And smartphones have only become common in the last decade or so. What that means is that the technology that dominates today's teenager culture wasn't available a generation ago. And with these incredible technological advances, major social changes are inevitable. Many of these changes are positive and empowering, but some changes, especially in the realm of personal communication, could turn out to be socially crippling. Because texting and Facebook updates often make up the majority of teenager social interactions, today's teenagers are less likely to develop face-to-face communication skills and tend to be less adept at noticing and responding appropriately to social cues than the previous generation's teenagers. Notice how this big picture background information flows right into the thesis statement. Also, notice that both of these examples included some specific facts and statistics that you could only get through research. Regardless of how much of the big picture you choose to show in your introduction, doing this well means that you, as the writer, have to understand the facts behind the big picture, which means that you'd better research your topic well, or else writing an introduction paragraph is always going to be difficult. I think you need some practice. It's time for you to go to work and for me to go and watch The Dark Knight.